President Yoon will embark on a week-long trip on Thursday to South America to attend the APEC and G20 summits. Eyes are on whether he will meet U.S. President-elect Donald Trump on the road. Bitcoin continues to break its previous highs with hopes of President-elect Trump's crypto-friendly policies. The Korean won weakened against the greenback on Tuesday, and Kospi lost ground. North Korea ratifies its mutual defense treaty with Russia, following which it could make its troops attached official to help Moscow's war against Ukraine. It's November 12th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. President Yoon is departing for South America this week to partake in annual multilateral meetings aimed at promoting global interests, including trade and stability. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon covers his agenda and possible key bilateral meetings.
President Yoon is set to embark on his first trip to South America on Thursday as he joins world leaders at the APEC summit in Lima, Peru, and the G20 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, while also being hosted by Peru for an official bilateral visit. While the trip was expected, a briefing on Tuesday detailed what to expect. After a flight of more than 24 hours, President Yoon will land on the evening of the 14th in Lima, local time. Official engagements start the day after for the APEC, and the APEC Business Advisory Council and CEO Summit will be on that day along with the first session. The APEC Summit comes as South Korea is set to host next year's APEC Summit in Gyeongju, Gyeongsangbuk-do Province.
In the first session of the upcoming APEC Summit, themed Empower, Include, Grow, the leaders of member economies will discuss ways to promote inclusive economic growth and support vulnerable groups. President Yoon will emphasize South Korea's commitment as next year's APEC chair to leading discussions on fostering a free and stable trade and investment environment.
On the 16th, an APEC leaders retreat in the morning will wrap up his APEC schedule. And in the afternoon, the official visit to Peru will begin as President Yoon will be welcomed by Peruvian President Dina Boluarte for a summit which will be followed by a joint press conference. Peru is the only nation in South America that South Korea has a comprehensive strategic partnership with, and the two nations are seeking to expand exchanges in the arms industry as well as the shipbuilding industry.
Peru was the second South American country after Chile to sign a free trade agreement with South Korea, and the two nations have since developed a close economic partnership as a gateway to the Latin American market.
After this, President Yoon will take off for Brazil to join the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro on the 17th. On the 18th, he will start his G20 engagements with Session 1, which Yoon will address global hunger and poverty, while during Session 3 on the 19th, he will deliver a speech on clean energy. And as usual, President Yoon is set to meet with participating leaders for sideline summits, with the leaders of Japan, Vietnam, and Mexico confirmed so far. An official at the top office also said that it's in contact with China for a possible sideline summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping, while a trilateral with the U.S. and Japan is also not ruled out. Meanwhile, when asked whether a meeting with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump is possible while on the road for these summits, an official said it is true that they're maintaining close communication with President-elect Trump's team, seemingly not ruling out the possibility completely. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The Korean economy is expected to witness slower growth this year and next year amid uncertainty over exports as the incoming U.S. administration under Donald Trump pledges tougher tariffs on all imports. Choi Soo-hyung has more.
The Korea Development Institute has predicted that South Korea's economic growth will slow to 2% in 2025, down from an earlier forecast of 2.1%. Data from the KDI on Tuesday show that although domestic spending is expected to see some recovery, weaker export growth will lead to the lower overall growth compared to this year. The institute also lowered its growth estimate for this year from 2.5% to 2.2%. The IMF and OECD still project South Korea's growth rate for this year at 2.5%. The institute explained the slow domestic recovery and increased uncertainty around exports to the U.S. due to the second Trump administration term are key reasons for the adjustment.
Domestic recovery is slower than we expected. Additionally, interest rate cuts were delayed, and the negative impacts of these cuts were greater than anticipated. The forecast for next year was further lowered to reflect concerns that export growth may worsen due to the Trump election.
KDI also expects the increase in job numbers to fall from 180,000 this year to 140,000 next year. Consumer price growth is forecast at 1.6% in 2025, below the targeted 2%. While domestic demand may improve slightly, the KDI noted that construction investment remains weak, which could persist and present a risk. The institute predicted that South Korea's growth rate for exports will drop from 7% this year to 2.1% next year, anticipating a rise in U.S. protectionism. It believes that tariff barriers won't go into effect immediately and that, if tariffs are raised, this will likely start in 2026. Experts forecast South Korea's economic growth rate may not stay positive during the second Trump administration.
The second version of Trump administration stresses trade protectionism. The second Trump administration will focus not just China, but all the countries which have tremendous surplus against the United States, like Mexico, Canada, Korea, Japan, including China.
Dr. Shin said that exports are already showing a negative trend this year and the growth rate may be lower than 2.0% next year. Choi Soo-young, Arirang News.
Bitcoin has broken past its previous high, almost reaching $90,000, as investors continue to bet big on Trump's return to the White House next year. South Korea's benchmark Kospi dropped to a 3-month low, alongside the Korean won weakening. Choi Min-jung brings the latest.
A day after surpassing $80,000, the price of Bitcoin continued to soar, nearing $90,000. On Monday, the price of a Bitcoin hit a new all-time high of $89,600. It experienced a 9% jump over the last 24 hours. The cryptocurrency market has recently been on a winning streak, with watchers pointing to Donald Trump's victory in last week's U.S. presidential election. Trump has expressed positive opinions regarding virtual currency. Since Election Day last Tuesday, the price of Bitcoin jumped 27%. Tesla shares have also risen 9%, with CEO Elon Musk expected to play an important role in Trump's second term. Meanwhile, the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed at over 44,000 for the first time after rising another 300 points. S&P 500 inched up slightly to surpass 6,000 for the first time. The tech-heavy Nasdaq rose just enough to reach an all-time high above 19,290. Despite the positive figures, Bloomberg reported that Trump's market honeymoon won't last much longer due to the recent rise in U.S. Treasury yields and the value of the dollar. With Trump expected to tighten U.S. trade policies, the Korean won weakened against the U.S. dollar, surpassing 1,400 against the greenback. It marks the first time in 2 years that the dollar-to-won exchange rate closed above the 1,400 mark. Trump's protectionist policies have also led to Seoul shares falling to the lowest point in 3 months on Tuesday. The benchmark Kospi lost over 49 points, or 1.94%, to close at around 2,482. Investors are remaining cautious given the weak investment sentiment fueled by Trump's pledge to impose high tariffs on imported goods. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Today, we take a closer look at President-elect Trump assembling a new cabinet and what changes it could bring to South Korea. Our political correspondent Shin Ha-young joins us here in the studio. Welcome, Ha-young. Thanks for having me. What changes are expected from Trump's America First approach?
Well, so major economic changes are expected under President-elect Donald Trump's America First approach, which focused on countering China and promoting business-friendly policies. And the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry outlined potential impacts by using the letters in Trump's name to highlight key areas of concern. So here, T stands for tariffs on imports to protect the U.S. economy, and R for a return to fossil fuels, U for uncertainty in high-tech industries, and M for changes in monetary policy, while P stands for personal diplomacy, hinting at potential talks with North Korea. And Trump has emphasized reducing the U.S. trade deficit, proposing a 60% tariff on Chinese goods and a 10 to 20% so-called universal tariff on other imports, raising concerns for South Korean exports. Take a listen.
Trump's campaign pledges suggest significant challenges for South Korea's trade and exports. Most experts expect the situation to worsen. His election victory is likely to affect next year's current account balance.
And last year, South Korea recorded its largest ever trade surplus, with the U.S. reaching $44.4 billion. And while it's likely this record will be surpassed this year, adjustment in exports to the U.S. are expected in the future. And the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy stressed the need to quickly develop strategies to prepare for uncertainties and minimize the negative impacts of Trump's second term.
South Korea's investments in the U.S. can help reduce the U.S. trade deficit, create jobs, and support economic growth. So we should use this leverage with Trump's team to ensure that universal tariffs are applied selectively rather than to all products.
And Trump's election victory could also signal a major shift for South Korea's security landscape, with one of the concerns being the defense cost sharing for U.S. forces here in Korea.
You're absolutely right. So there are concerns that Trump may push to renegotiate the recent defense cost-sharing deal between Seoul and Washington, and which is why this year's deal was sealed earlier than usual. And this follows his remarks calling South Korea a money machine and suggesting it should contribute more for U.S. troops stationed there. And in response, one expert suggests it's important to first consider Trump's foreign policy apparatus. Take a listen.
Previous Trump administration was restrained by a traditional foreign policy wing of the conservative foreign policy circles, but it will be different this time. So this Asia First approach will likely to have huge implications to the geopolitical competition in East Asia. So keenly following these new conservative policy circles is going to be the most important task for the South Korean government and intellectuals.
And regarding North Korea, as I've mentioned, many expect Trump to revive his personal diplomacy with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to address unresolved issues surrounding the North Korea's nuclear program. And regarding the matter, a senior official from Seoul's foreign ministry stated today that South Korea will make sure its stance is included in any discussions involving potential talks between Trump and Kim during Trump's second term.
And many are watching who will be included in his new cabinet. What's the latest here?
So it was last Thursday that Trump took his first step in forming a second-term cabinet by naming his campaign co-manager Susie Walz as his White House chief of staff. And 2 days later, Trump announced that former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and former Republican presidential contender Nikki Haley, who was also a former UN ambassador, would not be joining his administration, signaling his preference for loyalists. And so far, Republican Representative Ellie Stefanik has been selected as UN ambassador, while Representative Michael Waltz, known for his tough stance on China, will serve as national security advisor. And Trump is also expected to appoint Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. And along with the cabinet formation, attention is also now on Trump's Day One plan, which include mass deportations of migrants and withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. And meanwhile, with Republicans regaining control of the Senate and likely holding the House majority, a red sweep is expected. So with the backing across the legislative, executive, and even judicial branches, Trump is poised for a strong start to his second term.
Right, we will have to see how it all plays out. Thank you, Hyun, for the report.
My pleasure.
North Korea has ratified its defense pact with Russia that affirms military assistance in the event of an aggression against either one of the two sides. Kim Bo-kyung explains what this could signify.
North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un has signed off on a landmark mutual defense pact with Russia amid growing tensions over Pyongyang's troop deployment to fight against Ukraine. That's according to the North Korean Central News Agency on Tuesday, where it said the treaty of a comprehensive strategic partnership between Pyongyang and Moscow was ratified the previous day as a decree from the leader. This follows Russian President Vladimir Putin signing the pact on Saturday. The Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty was signed between Kim and Putin in Pyongyang on June 19th this year, and is known to have revived the automatic military intervention clause from the treaty in 1961, as its Article Number 4 obliges both countries to provide immediate military assistance to each other using all means necessary if either faces aggression. An official from South Korea's Unification Ministry says exchanging ratification instruments can be done through embassies, or high-level officials may visit for an exchange ceremony. Once it takes effect, an expert says it will now enable North Korea to officially dispatch its troops.
For now, it was not an official troop deployment, but rather it was similar to sending mercenaries. But if the treaty takes effect after ratification, then North Korea could officially participate in the Russia-Ukraine war as a third party.
As Russian President Vladimir Putin has already spoken of, joint military exercises between Russia and North Korea could be possible as well. That being said, in terms of what it would now mean for the Korean peninsula, an expert said it means what's happening on the peninsula is going to be international.
It's very significant that Russia is now going to actively engage in the Korean Peninsula conflict. If any military clash were to occur on the peninsula, it would inevitably escalate into an international war.
Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
In the Middle East, local authorities in Gaza and Lebanon continue to report civilian casualties as Israel remains relentless in its military campaign. Yoon brings the latest.
Palestinian medics have reported that an Israeli airstrike late Monday killed 7 people at a cafe near Khan Yunis. That followed the 20 people killed in Israeli air and ground strikes on the Nuseirat camp in central Gaza on Sunday and Monday, which included tanks opening fire on residents and displaced families in the tent encampment. That brings the death toll in Gaza since Sunday night to at least 37. Israel has not commented on the attacks. An Israeli airstrike in northern Lebanon, also on Monday, killed at least 14 and injured 15 others. The attack on the town of Ain Yaqub marks the northernmost point in Lebanon hit by Israeli forces. The town's mayor said that the airstrikes hit a building with 30 people inside, including Syrian refugees, and that some people were still trapped under the rubble. Meanwhile, the Israeli military said its forces took measures to minimize collateral damage based on precise intelligence, saying that it targeted a military structure with a terrorist inside. Last month, on October 13th, the U.S. issued a 30-day ultimatum threatening sanctions on Israel unless there's an increase in the amount of humanitarian aid reaching Gaza. The ultimatum is set to expire on Tuesday or Wednesday, raising questions about what measures will be triggered in response to Israel's failure to fulfill U.S. demands. According to COGAT, the Israeli military authority in charge of coordinating humanitarian aid for Gaza, An average of 57 trucks of food were allowed to enter the Gaza territory in October, far short of the 350 trucks demanded by the U.S. and far less than the 600 a day that aid agencies said is necessary to meet basic needs. Only 25,155 tons of food aid entered Gaza in October, the least for any full month since December 2023. For November so far, only 8,805 tons of food aid has crossed through Israeli checkpoints. However, Israeli officials are rejecting the charge of aid being deliberately restricted and are accusing humanitarian agencies of failing to organize distribution. 이은진, Arirang News.
In other news, a growing number of Western publishers are showing renewed interest in Korean literature following author Han Kang's crowning as a Nobel laureate this year. Our Yoon tells us more.
Author Kang Ji-young first published her female action novel Mrs. Shim is a Killer in 2010. The protagonist, a woman in her 50s with no husband and no job, suddenly finds her calling through her impeccable butcher skills and becomes a killer. This cult bestseller is now set to be published internationally. Mrs. Shim is a Killer will be published by Doubleday in the UK and by Harper in the US in the spring of 2026. Translation rights have also been sold to over 10 countries.
We continue to get inquiries from Asian and South American countries, so I think exports will expand further. Basically, the narrative and story are interesting. There's a universal story that is relatable. I think the best part of the book is that it has a Korean sentiment baseline.
Writer Song Yu-jung can look forward to the publication of her first novel, The Memory Bookshop, after 6 years of writing web novels. Major publishing company HarperCollins has acquired global English rights for Song's latest work, signing a contract worth over $70,000 with her. HarperCollins said the novel will be published in hardback in August 2025.
Publishers around the world understood the underlying universal emotions between mother and daughter. There was even a world-famous editor who said the book brought them to tears.
This trend in the publishing industry of recognizing Korean literary works took off at the Frankfurt Book Fair, the world's largest annual trade fair for books, held over 5 days in mid-October. And at this year's fair, increase for publishing rights for Korean works increased 3 to 4 times from previous years. This has triggered greater support from the domestic publishing industry and related organizations. They're planning various projects, starting with higher participation in overseas book exhibitions, as well as for translation.
In 2014, we supported novelist Han Kang in her participation at the London Book Fair, where she met with Deborah Smith, a British translator of Korean fiction. I've been reminded of the power of exchange projects and support projects.
Back in the mid-1990s, there were Korean literary works that received attention in Europe, like the works of the writer Lee Mun-yeol. But that popularity didn't last long. And for that reason, long-term measures need to be taken to expand the basis of reading and literary works, so that the achievement of a Korean novelist's Nobel Prize in Literature builds momentum and is not only a special event that will fade away. Yoon, Arirang News.
The unusually warm weather continues in mid-November. Today, the whole country was as warm as around 20 degrees Celsius. The morning temperature in Seoul was 11.4 degrees, and the daytime temperature rose up to 19 degrees, which is 6 degrees higher than usual. These mild conditions will continue tomorrow. This year's tuning test is just 2 days away. There will be no worries about the cold tomorrow, the preliminary call-up date, and Thursday as well, the day of the test. However, light rain is expected on the East Coast tomorrow and the day after tomorrow from late afternoon across the country. Tomorrow, Seoul and Daegu will start off at 8 degrees, Gwangju and Gyeongju 9 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 18 in Daegu and Gyeongju, Chuncheon 17 degrees. Throughout this week, unusually warm autumn weather will continue. However, after the sun goes down, the temperature drops quickly. Please control your body temperatures. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thanks for watching. A panel session coming up.